on how widespread that process of learning is. Let me turn now to Dr. Lixing Zhang, who's going to talk a little bit of the context within which this is happening, and also the role of the internationalization of the renminbi as one of the supporting, or if you like, accompanying policies that could support the development of these initiatives.
Okay, thank you very much, Chair. It's my great pleasure to be here, involved in such an interesting conference. As the judge mentioned, that the BIR now has moving from just a statement to action, right? A lot of achievements has already been made in this regard over the past 4 or 5 years. The trade between China and the BRI countries, BRI countries, has been increasing very fast. I think the growth rate is higher than on average level in China with the foreign countries. And I think the future could be quite bright in the future. I would like to now move to a brief discussion on the role of the renminbi internationalization in the BRI. As probably you know, that since 2009, the renminbi internationalization has been developing very fast, especially in the early years. The share of China's cross-border trade settlement now has been settled by renminbi almost, well, I think in the peak time it's almost 1/4 to 25% of, but now in recent years it's declining for some reasons a little bit. And also, as you know, that renminbi has been included in the SDR basket, currency basket, and the renminbi has become the reserve currency of many countries. Over 60 countries has included the renminbi as reserve currencies. And also China signs, I think, over 3 trillion yuan currency swap agreement with foreign central banks. Over 30 countries, 30, I think. And also over, I think, 7 trillion assets, including onshore and offshore market assets, renminbi assets were held by foreigners and foreign individuals and foreign institutes, financial institutes. A lot of development has been found. During this process, I think a lot of business actually happened between Chinese company and BRI initiative countries. For example, the share of renminbi settlement trade was, I think, almost 14% in last year, but on average in China only 12%. So the share is higher than on average. And also China has signed, about 36 bilateral currency swap agreement with other countries. 2/3 of them are signed with BRI initiative country. I think looking forward, we can find opportunities and also challenges in renminbi's internationalization, particularly with the BRI countries. I think in terms of opportunities, one is that, as you know, China has trade tension, probably trade war against the United States. I don't think it will be solved in the near future. It could be a long-term problem. So this kind of things will, I think, very likely to make more Chinese companies to diversify their market. More markets will switch to the BRI countries. So this will increase the chance for renminbi internationalization with these countries. And also China is opening its financial sector significantly. So it also created some chance for more foreign countries, including the BRI country, to invest in China and also issue bonds and stocks, maybe, and also build up or make cooperation with Chinese financial institutions. And also, of course, there are some challenges I would mention that one is that the deglobalization, as you know, that it's still going on, not only in Europe, but also only in some other countries. And secondly is probably the lack of understanding between China and some other BRI countries. So over the past 2 or 3 years, we can find some projects has to be sustained. So I think probably because of, really because some financial burden issues, but probably because of some lack of understanding, lack of trust. So this is a challenge, I think, not only for the BRI initiative business, but also also for the internationalization of the renminbi. So, and the final challenge is the process of the renminbi internationalization. As I mentioned earlier, that since 2015, actually the renminbi internationalization more or less has been slowing down. Not only in the trade settlement, but also in the bond issuance in Hong Kong, in some other areas. But not the share in reserve currency. The share in reserve currency is still growing up. So how to keep the renminbi internationalization a sustainable process is a big challenge, I think. I hope that China can solve this problem successfully in the future. So I'll stop here.
Thank you very much, Dr. Zhang. And I think we'll come back again. You raise a whole parallel set of questions as well, which about the internationalization of the renminbi, and in a way, that's a phenomenon that's underway in itself. And it'd be quite interesting to see the synergies and between these two initiatives, how much they are linked. But before we get into that, let's get a little bit of a perspective from representatives who've been looking at this project from a different vantage point. And I'm going to turn first to Sherry Madeira to give us your sense of this.
Great, thank you very much, Masood. Thank you to the AIFC for having us here. I mean, I think this is an interesting group to talk about an incredibly interesting topic. Some ask me, well, as the special representative for Asia for the City of London, why do you care about the Belt and Road Initiative? In fact, if you look at maps, London is not on it. London is not on those wonderful maps we see circulating. Now, every time I say that in public forum, I hope that someone is going to send me one that they've created, including London on the map. So let me see if I can convince you over the course of this next little while and see if you can create one and send it over to me. Please do. But actually, it's more deep than just being on the initial map of what the Belt and Road launched back in 2013, right here in Kazakhstan. Actually, it's about how it is that we need to work together to do something quite important, which is not succeed in terms of the Belt and Road Initiative, but actually looking at the bigger picture, which is thinking about Asian infrastructure and how that needs to be funded, and how it is that funding Asian infrastructure well is going to bring prosperity to a whole section of the globe that currently is moving forward, and we can accelerate. So the numbers on some of that are compelling. I know that in our next panel, we've got an ADB scholar who's going to talk to us from different perspectives. But to steal a bit of that thunder, 1.7 trillion US dollars per year is the infrastructure gap. That's not what we need to spend on infrastructure. That's on the bit that is not already spoken for from the MDB community, the governments that are already investing in infrastructure around the globe. And that's, I think, where London starts fitting in very well. And when London looks at the Belt and Road Initiative, we think about how it is that we can actually meet the challenge of crowding in private finance, mobilizing private finance to sit alongside some of that risk capital that's already being well deployed across the world. And why is it that we feel that we have a role in that? Because as the #1 global financial center, obviously our markets are something we're very proud of as being very deep and very liquid and being very diverse. So I'm incredibly pleased that Dr. Zhang mentioned RMB internationalization, because I do think that part of funding that gap is to think about how to use currency effectively so that actually it becomes a tool for prosperity, for profitability, as opposed to potentially being quite a serious drag on returns that can affect who it is that's going to be coming in and funding this great Belt and Road Initiative. So from a London perspective, I think that we see that crowding in and mobilization as something that we do every day. The thinking in London about creating structured finance, creating infrastructure, projects finance, thinking about project bonds, creating sophisticated ways to leverage the capital markets, using the London Stock Exchange in various ways. I mean, that's something that becomes the bread and butter, lifeblood of what London has been doing for decades. But the things that I hear in London about the Belt and Road Initiative is, well, what is a Belt and Road project? Where's the list? Show me the list so that I can actually go and invest in those projects. There's no list. Which ones are on the Belt and Road and which ones are not? Well, I mean, from my own background, I used to live in Beijing for 3 years. And actually, my response to our London community is that actually this is bigger than just a list of projects. In fact, we should all be contributing to some of those project lists. And frankly, the question should be more about where are the projects that are bankable and where are the projects that are sustainable? And if we start thinking as a global financial community about getting those two things right, then we're actually mobilizing that capital in a way that's sustainable, not only in terms of environmental sustainability, which is incredibly important and something that we and I personally spend a lot of time talking to investors about, but also sustainable through the life cycle of an infrastructure project, which can last decades. If we're thinking about power plants, we're thinking about renewable energy, if we're thinking about transportation and getting that return on investment, these things are decades in the making. So being able to get that right is really important. So what does London think it can do? What does Europe start thinking about when we think about the Belt and Road Initiative? I think there are 5 things that we can consider as being a contributor to the success of the Belt and Road. The first one is the use of law and contracts and English law. And I think this is something I'm preaching to the converted sitting here in Astana. Astana has already embraced the idea of using the rule of law through the English law system. This is not saying that it's the best. I mean, obviously there are lots of different ways of looking at the law. However, having some sort of reliable, sustainable way of looking at disputes, which will happen, and looking at contracts across so many different borders to get this right is going to be really critical. The second thing is currency. So we've talked about the RMB internationalization, but really a lot of the MDBs, the multilateral development banks, a lot of governments actually fund infrastructure with hard dollars, with US dollars. Well, London is one of those places where you can exchange US dollars most liquidly and most effectively and profitably to currencies along the Belt and Road. So getting that currency piece right, and I think the point about the swap lines and the currency bilaterals with the RMB is critical, but so too is a deep liquid market to make that happen. The third thing, and I'm surprised at you, George, you didn't mention fintech. So I also sit on the Cyberport Advisory Council. So George and I are good friends. So I'm sure you left this one for me intentionally. But I think that fintech, thinking about blockchain and thinking about how it is that you can actually make some of these transactions between parties that don't necessarily know each other or have deep history of transacting a little bit more secure, a little bit more reliable. Blockchain plays a role in that, and of course this is a new concept, new technology, and being able to do that digitally I think is going to be a really important point. And we're already working with the likes of Hong Kong, with Shanghai, with Singapore, in order to make this not just a London strength or a Hong Kong strength, but a strength that is going to be able to support this going forward. So the third one is fintech. Fourth is insurance. And before all of you fall asleep, it's not the most dynamic and exciting topic, but it's critically important when you think about actually some of these projects and how it is that they're going to be deployed. Environmental insurance, geopolitical insurance, completion insurance, timelines. Again, using a market that knows how to price these risks, being able to put that into the project so it still becomes bankable is going to be really important going forward. And finally, my fifth and my most favorite is green and sustainability. There's a wonderful quote. I work very closely with Dr. Ma Jun in China and also the UN guru for climate change and sustainability. And he's done some number crunching that are quite scary. If the Belt and Road Initiative does not respect environmental and green standards for sustainability, we could be in a serious problem globally in terms of corrupting our environment. And this 2% climate change goal that so many countries have signed up to could easily accelerate to 4 or 5% within the next 5 to 12 years. So again, I don't think this is something that is a nice to have, it's a must have. And in fact, London investors are now using it as an absolute criteria, is to make sure that the investments that they're doing in infrastructure are sustainable. Using the Equator Principles, using the SDG goals, and using some new concepts that we're developing here in London through a Green Belt and Road Investor Alliance that are pulling together investors from around the world to say what is green and what is it that we will not invest in. So something I'm hoping that we can make sure that is ratified not only across financial centers, but across where the projects are being built and making sure that those sustainability principles go in from day one. So with all those 5 things in mind, London is actually a really exciting place to be when you're talking about Belt and Road. I spend about 50% of my time in Asia, and I've timed it. It takes about 4.5 minutes for someone in China to talk about the Belt and Road in any meeting. In London, it's probably about 8 or 10 minutes, but we're getting there. My point is that people are really thinking about this, and it's not just something that's an Asian-focused initiative. It's something we're looking at for good reason. The CBBC, the China-Britain Business Council, and KPMG and HSBC tried to quantify this. And they looked at London and the UK benefiting to a tune of £1.8 billion per year in services revenue alone if they're engaging in new projects along the Belt and Road. So for us, it's a really smart thing to do, and it's something that we're very engaged with.
Thank you very much, Sherry, and thank you for making the links between what's happening in the Belt and Road Initiative, as you might think of it, and actually a lot of other changes, phenomena, challenges that exist alongside. And I think one of the things we want to come back to is how much of this is open infrastructure. When you think about BRI, are you thinking of a framework in which projects can be in BRI and also be part of other things, or is it a sort of closed infrastructure? And I think you raised some important points about sustainability, and just one number that always strikes me is that the world's infrastructure is going to double in the next generation. So over the next 20 years, the amount of infrastructure that we are going to lay down is going to be the same as exists in the world today. And if you, the criteria and sustainability of that infrastructure, the decisions we make about that infrastructure, will affect us for the next 150 years. And so it's really a huge moment of opportunity and challenge for the whole world, because the decisions we are now making will have a big impact on whether or not we are able to reach the 2% target on climate that we've set ourselves. So I think it's glad that you made that connection on sustainability. Last but not least, I'm going to turn to Ariel Cohen and get a little bit of a perspective from the US on how we look at the both the initiative and the implications of it, and then we will come back for a second round of discussions. So Ariel.
Thank you very much. Washington, D.C. is an interesting place. It really takes a lot of time for it to focus on challenges, but when it does, it really focuses. Unfortunately, the easier thing to do for strategists and generals is to over-militarize the challenges and to see Belt and Road and Eurasia through the prism, through the lens of our frictions with China. And to distinguish between economic development, business investment, and geopolitics is sometimes challenging, especially for top politicians who have a very short attention span, and especially for those, I will not mention any names or haircuts, that do not have geopolitical background. So let me offer a perspective of someone who studied Eurasia all his life, wrote his PhD on Eurasia, and was in and out of Kazakhstan for the last 23 years. The United States will play a role in development of BRI. The question we're asking ourselves is whether it's going to be a positive role or a negative role. On the one hand, there's a business community. GM and GE, especially GE, are making a lot of money investing here or selling equipment, etc. If I'm correct, yeah, 2.3 billion in equipment orders at the GE, which otherwise is not doing very well, and it tripled in its revenue in 2016. Other firms such as Caterpillar, Honeywell, and others, and also non-European firms such as ABB, DHL, Linde, BASF, are all making a lot of money here. Thank you very much. It is no coincidence that a movement of goods, people, and resources form the backbone of geopolitical influence. Ports, railroads, pipelines, and other infrastructure investment projects have an inherent dual civilian military capacity, and the Chinese leadership admittedly links connectivity with economic development and by extension with security and stability. Xi Jinping said in 2014, quote, "For most Asian countries, development is the master key to regional security issues." The nature of Central Asian geography that lies between China, Russia, the Indian subcontinent, and markets of 2.5 billion people means that Central Asia will serve as a transitional economic bridge between world's largest markets. So having AIFC in Astana, in the heart of Eurasia, is a logical step. One, to provide the capital raising platform. Two, the dispute resolution platform that my colleague from London mentioned. And three, a neutral platform to adjudicate or arbitrate conflicts that may arise during the economic activity in the region. A terrific idea, isn't it? So how do you keep America positively involved and not following the following two quotes? And in matter of full disclosure, I censored the quotes not to make them too inflammatory. One is from the US National Security Strategy, December 2017. So this is a current strategy, quote, "A geopolitical competition between free and repressive visions of the world order is taking place in the Indo-Pacific and beyond." So I guess here it's beyond. "Although the United States seeks to continue to cooperate with China, China is using economic inducements and penalties, influence operations, and implied military threats to persuade other states to heed its political and security agenda." Two is from a recent speech from our Defense Secretary James Mattis, who openly criticized One Belt, One Road as, quote, "a Chinese strategy of coercion over its neighbors" in a speech at the US Naval War College. Quote, "The Ming Dynasty appears to be the Chinese model, albeit in a more muscular manner, ... espousing One Belt, One Road when this diverse world has many belts and many roads, and attempting to replicate on the international stage their authoritarian domestic model, militarizing South China Sea, features while using predatory economics of piling massive debt on others." Ladies and gentlemen, I think we all need to take a chill pill. We want to be involved, the business wants to be involved, and parts of American government want to be involved here. To get US positively involved in BRI, Washington will seek to incorporate trusted partners to curtail, shape, and contain the military aspects of Belt and Road and leverage good standing relationships with the United States and downplay the military aspects. Allies should invite the US investment where possible, particularly in those sectors where American companies hold a comparative advantage, such as digital and high-tech infrastructure. The countries of Belt and Road can provide such opportunities. Countries of Belt and Road also can offer to become a platform to facilitate information exchanges and an alignment of approaches where possible. Countries can use their reputation, such as Kazakhstan, as an honest broker to aid communication and reduce possible tensions. I think this is the emerging function of Kazakhstan, as we saw with the Astana process, with the Iran consultations and others. Agree to uphold market rules and international standards for improved access to Western financing. OECD investment favors predictable, free, rule-following market environment, and AIFC, again, is a good example of how this is done. Finally, as someone who is dealing with energy since 2001, I think businesses and governments will be amiss not to pay attention to the development of green energy and green energy financing. So the share of renewables in the energy mix will provide a welcome balance to the traditional hydrocarbons and coal in this part of the world. Ladies and gentlemen, let me conclude by saying that I think that the opportunities are not lost. I think we need more dialogue. My firm is engaged in helping countries and companies to communicate strategically their points of view and promote their projects. And the BRI, Belt and Road, is, in my view, reformatting the Eastern Hemisphere. I'll repeat that. Reformatting the Eastern Hemisphere as we know it. It is not a process of purposely diminishing American power. It is not a process of purposely changing the world order. It's an organic and historic process. Yes, it is connected with the rise of China. There's no way to beat around the bush here. But it is also going to change the lives of tens and hundreds of millions of people in terms of development, in terms of infrastructure, in terms of higher added value projects such as AIFC. So I think we all need to find the ways to cooperate, to invest, to make money, to flourish and prosper. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Ariel. So you've had 4 very informed interventions. And I want to just perhaps ask a couple of questions before opening it up. And I'd like to start from a little bit the perspective that Ariel relayed, and I would say relayed in terms of what some people are thinking about the BRI as being part of a broader strategy that seeks to promote, I think you used the word impose in the quote that you had, a particular model of development of society. And I want to get a little bit of sense from the other panelists of what do you think could be done to remove that perception? Are the projects, for example, that, George, that you see, that you're talking about, are they projects which are following the kinds of norms and transparency that would help to demonstrate that they're like any other set of projects that would be considered according to good international norms? And then I want to also get perhaps a sense from Dr. Zhang Lixin in terms of, do you think that the accompanying process of the internationalization of the renminbi, is that going to help this, address this perception, or is it actually going to be seen as part of the reason why people may relate the BRI to being part of a sort of broader strategy? How much do you think is good to link the two, or are these two separate phenomena that are undertaking, that are happening in their own right, if you like? So perhaps get those and then we'll move on to other topics. So if I might turn to George first on that.
Thank you. I think the BRI should, as Ariel said, looked at, opportunities are not lost, definitely. The opportunities are in front of us. If you look at the way BRI projects are being negotiated or planned, it's a totally voluntary process. It's equal partnership. So, for example, even the AIIB, the Asian Infrastructure Investment Bank or the like, they cannot get a project unless the host country and the local partners really want to do it. And unless, the local law and regulations allow for it. So it's really a win-win or voluntary, totally voluntary, negotiated on commercial term, and of course it should be based on G2G trust and understanding and negotiation as well. But BRI as a form of public goods, something lacking for quite some time globally on that scale, I think should be a welcome sign, should be embraced by all of us. The key is how to make it work. And Chairman's questions are, definitely there. I mean, how to get it done, I think a few things are happening. Using the 2 examples I quoted, the Eastern Economic Corridor in Thailand and the Jakarta-Bandung high-speed rail link project. These 2 projects are, and also projects in Malaysia and other places, Bangladesh, and you name it, quite a number of projects. But these 2 projects show that the Chinese side, they are supposed to bring to the table the best of the best in their own field. I mean, that is, for example, high-speed rail, and that's a lot of expertise there. but also it involves training of local management and maintenance and ongoing development and so on. You are talking about this very self-constrained and self-imposed strategy to bring the best to the project. So that means definition of what is a green standard, what is sustainable. So the whole idea of making projects sustainable is very key now. And with that done, I think the local people, the local stakeholders will feel very positive about BRI projects, as they should welcome that. So it's not easy. So the key now is not quantity, it's quality, the quality of projects. And the more quality the projects, the initial projects are, the more good projects, you know, can come along. So I think that's another way of overcoming the challenges. Another one is we have to involve private sector capital. Despite the capitalization of AIIB and even the entire balance sheet of the China Development Bank and the like, you know, the need for capital is much, much more than that. And if you don't have private sector involvement, and particularly international institutional investors' involvement, BRI project progress will be slow. Yeah. And the involvement of commercial sector is important because of governance, because of professional management, because of, you know, efficiency in management and development and so on. So, and that is important to ensure that we have the best quality in achieving our project implementation. Other ways of overcoming the challenges include, for example, involvement of many industry platforms, business associations' efforts to find and to screen projects and to form alliances, consortium, teams, I mean, to invest together. So in that way, you can bring all the necessary expertise together in any one project and improve the success rate significantly. So we see a lot of that happening now. Taking Hong Kong as an example, we recently have seen the setup of the Belt and Road General Chamber of Commerce. And we have seen the setup of various Belt and Road committees, including one in the Hong Kong Trade and Development Council, of which I'm a member on that committee. So a lot of joint efforts are being made to find projects, to screen projects, to shape projects, and to manage, to invest. The recent Belt and Road Summit in Hong Kong brought to Hong Kong 5,000 people from around the world. And one forecast about the Belt and Road economies in the future, one of them is Belt and Road economies will occupy for 80% of the world GDP by the year 2050. It's just one generation away. So Belt and Road is the world. I mean, this Eurasian Renaissance phenomenon. So how can we make the pie bigger and how we can get the rest of the world involved is the key. My last point is, don't forget there's another Belt and Road, which is the digital Belt and Road, or we call it the digital Silk Road. A lot of things can be done there to help the young people and the small to and medium enterprises. One example is FinTech in Hong Kong. Working with London, we have a lot of solutions that can benefit emerging markets, that can enable small to medium enterprises to have a place in the economy, and to also let young people have access to the entrepreneurial opportunities that they deserve. So this is my quick list of some of the things that we can do to overcome the challenges in front of us. But the key is let's go for it and make it work, and only do it on a partnership basis, win-win basis, and fully voluntary basis. Thank you.
Thank you very much, George. Dr. Zhang.
I think the BRI program and renminbi internationalization actually can go together very well. In terms of the contribution of renminbi internationalization to the BRI program, I think they are following points. First, using renminbi as a settlement currency in the trade between China and BRI countries, I think will reduce the exchange rate risk between these two parts, and secondly is China, is a high saving country. China has export capital to the United States and the rest of the world for many years. I think now probably China can provide more saving, export more saving to the BRI countries. For example, if some of the BRI countries, they have shortage of capitals, so China can provide renminbi as renminbi loans and allows the companies from these areas, these countries to issue renminbi denominated bonds in onshore market or offshore market, then actually provide the funding to these countries, so raising their ability to import more, not only from China, probably from the rest of the world. And thirdly, renminbi can serve as a reserve currency for these countries, for the BRI countries, and it can diversify their financial risks. Fourthly is, I think having more RMB business in the financial market, financial centers of the BRI countries can improve their efficiency of the financial markets. For example, in some European countries, they have already set up RMB offshore financial centers, and I think such kind of business opportunity is very good for these countries. I think probably in the future, Astana can also have offshore renminbi financial center here, and they will create more financial business and commercial business opportunity. And so what else? Like the project sponsored, financed by IIIB and Silk Fund, I think using renminbi as financing currency can positively push forward such kind of project. So a big concern probably coming from the so-called financial burden. Christine Lagarde of IMF early this year sent a message on this. express his concern. But I think this is something, can be manageable, right? And because the business cooperation between China's company and the companies from BRI, they can negotiate, they can, they can have a feasibility studies to see whether such kind of financing is okay. If that is not okay, let it go. It is okay. That is, we can do it. So I think a lot of ways to be contributing the BRI project.
Thank you very much. So I want to open it up. Before I do, I just want to make sure there's a quick comment from Ariel and Sherry, if you had any quick comment before we open it up.
Having advised American companies in emerging markets for many years, I can tell you that if the conditions are right, or as the television show was called, the price is right, they will come here. They will rush here enthusiastically. However, if the perception of opacity, of lack of transparency, of the lack of the rule of law is there, is that's what they perceive, they will be risk averse because of a number of legal factors. Foreign Corrupt Practices Act is one. The fiduciary duty of the directors to the shareholders is two. If you go and invest a lot of money and lose the money and you were aware of the danger factors in that investment, you may be sued in person, and that's not what any director wants to do, even if he or she have director insurance. So building the projects in the Belt and Road as transparent, and more broadly contributing to transparency by having free press, or press that is at least free to analyze and criticize the business ventures, is a good thing. It's not a bad thing. The light makes air clean. So I think having AIFC based on the English law, having development of different tools, NGOs, media, etc., having a lot of educated professionals who can analyze business projects in professional manner, not in a critical manner just for the sake of criticism. This all contributes to the development of the investment climate in this part of the world, and I'm optimistic. I've been here in 1993. My family was here during World War II and before. I know what the baseline was here. Ladies and gentlemen, it's nothing short of a miracle how fast Kazakhstan is developing, how quickly Astana is developing into a regional and eventually a global center for business, for science and technology, for investment. So yes, it is important to build the roads, it is important to build the digital Silk Road, but it's also important, to borrow a Marxist term, and the superstructure that will be the 21st century modern and transparent superstructure to allow this to happen.
Thank you very much, Ariel. Sherry.
Yeah, very quickly, because I'd like to get some questions from the floor. I'd like to pick up on something Ariel said before, which I don't think we should gloss over, which is piling debt on others as a perception of the Belt and Road. This is an interesting one because we talk a lot about sort of, is it bankable? Is it sustainable? Actually, what the third thing I think is going to become part of the narrative over the course of even now and into the future is it affordable for that host country as well? And I think that this is something that we should all be participating in. And it is something that leads to that transparency, that thinking about how it is that you assess these projects. And it's actually not just a nice to have. It's not just, it's not about ESG and everyone doing social good. It's actually very real, because if we've got $1.5 trillion worth of a gap in infrastructure financing, wow, is it crazy for us to potentially lead to stranded assets along the Belt and Road because you can't continue to finance, or indeed that financing is unsustainable in its own right? So I do think that that's something that we need to think about, and perhaps part of that is about good transparency, great standards, thinking through and spending the money on the feasibility studies, and working together to make sure projects that aren't quite there become bankable, affordable, and sustainable before we put the first dime in.
Thank you very much, Sherry. And I think the analysis that's being done shows that there are probably about half a dozen countries in that range of BRI countries where concerns about the sustainability of the debt that they have taken on and are taking on are becoming quite pressing. And so part of the answer is simply to be more careful about having a realistic debt sustainability analysis before you embark on these projects, and also the assumptions about the foreign exchange that will be generated to repay them. And some of those assumptions in some cases are turning out to be a little bit optimistic. And part of it is, as you say, very much a question of being transparent. I spent a few days in Pakistan where there's a big Belt and Road related set of projects being developed. And one of the concerns raised by a lot of economists in Pakistan is a lack of clarity or a lack of transparency about exactly what is being proposed, when, how, and so there are many, many simulations being done, but not on a common basis. So I think the more transparency you have, the more clarity you have, the easier it is to get past the problems that arise from a misunderstanding, and the easier it is to get to discussing the issues which are real issues rather than those that come from a lack of information. So let me now open it up and get your comments, your perspectives, your questions to the panelists. And if you could just identify yourself, and then we will turn to you. Who would like to raise any points? Please, Bob.
Okay. My first question to Dr. Liqing Zhang, and I'm Bauer Bikmir. I'm the chief economist of the AAFC, and as an economist working for the AAFC, I'm very curious about your view on the prospects of Astana being the renminbi offshore zone for settlement, because now we are discussing it with the various Chinese institutions, with the financial regulator, of course, and we hope that we can accomplish that. And we also believe it would be a good opportunity for us to raise funds for infrastructure projects. I would like to hear your opinion. And just one question for the panel. Today, in any conference, it's just impossible to talk about anything without mentioning blockchain and fintech. And your specific use of the blockchain, how can we use trade finance, how you can provide transparency, how you can provide credibility, etc. So this is the topic that's been discussed a lot. Thank you.
Take a couple more questions if there are any, and then we will come back to the panelists. Anybody else would like to have any questions? Please, Mark.
Questions related to the diplomacy of the Silk Road. We talk a lot about so sometimes people say this is a new Marshall Plan, and the Chinese say no, this is not a new Marshall Plan. And you have other things I think are important. You have what they call the 16+1 initiative, where China come together with Eastern and the Balkan countries, where you have a lot of Chinese investment on the BRI. You have the creation of AIIB, you have the Secret Fund. So my question for all the panelists at the end is, is it a new narrative, and is China is providing a new chapter for global governance? So to see BRI less just from infrastructure investment project, but also that China is playing a new role and opening a new chapter in the way the global financial system is going to operate in the next decade. So how do you see the BRI in that context, and why we should be so negative? Of course, I completely understand the lack of transparency, the rule of the game, and the rise of debt sustainability in a lot of countries. But I think there is something more deeper. At a time where you see the US withdrawing in the global governance, why we should be worried about China becoming a provider and becoming, more influential in global governance? Is it maybe the new realities, and is it maybe the new geography of the global financial and global economics today? Thank you.
Is there any other? So I now have, so it's picking up. So it's 1, 2, 3, 4. Okay, so we were going to take those 4 and then come back to the panelists. So please.
Thank you very much. I'm the Dean of ADB Institute. I think infrastructure needs are different from country to country. Some regions are agricultural infrastructure needed. Some are industrial infrastructure. Some are tourism. Then it is not the same kind of infrastructure. How would you differentiate the kinds of infrastructure?
Thank you. And there was a gentleman too, there was just over there, a few rows behind.
Hi, my name is Noman Abdul Majid. I'm from Pakistan Oman Investment Company. My question regarding this debt sustainability is from the panelists that similar concerns have been raised about IMF and World Bank financing program previously, and they are still being raised. That these debts have not been sustainable, and the piling of debts and transparency issues and all these things. So my question is that how these concerns are different, the dynamics are different from the debts being taken up by the BRI initiatives. Like how do you differentiate between the concerns, the IMF World Bank programs and the BRI initiative programs? Thank you.
Thank you. And then there were 2 in the, I want to take those 2 first, so I'll come back to the others. So the gentleman in the middle over there, yeah. Maybe you could just raise your hand so that Mike can get to you. There you are. And then there's one right towards the back after you.
Yeah, hi there. Luke Manning from Thomson Reuters. Just a simple question, really. What role do you think data has to play, especially on the digital Silk Road?
Thank you. And then there's a gentleman right in the second row from the back.
Spasiba. I'm chairman of Ingenium Advisors. We are a financial microeconomics advisory in Malaysia. First of all, I'd like to say thank you to our brothers from China who have opened up massive rethinking and development through the Belt and Road Initiative. We've been scrambling to complete our little bit of the Belt and Road Initiative. We are excited to be able to send our goods all the way from Malaysia through to Poland one day. My question is actually a concern of our manufacturers. If we send our goods through either the northern or southern route, especially the southern route which cuts through a lot of countries, will there be a lot of border costs and transfer costs? Because this will raise significantly the cost of our goods as soon as it reaches final destination. Or is that going to be a cordon sanitaire, the entire place? I know it's a bit early to think, but it needs to be done. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I'm going to turn to the panelists, but I cannot turn to the panelists by having all the questions that have been raised. Not a single one has been raised by a lady. And I think we need to identify at least one question to introduce some gender balance into the questions here. So
that's Washington talking.
Is there anybody here who is going to raise a question before I turn to the panelists?
I'm not entirely sure that's relevant, to be honest. We've got a bunch of really great questions, and I'm sure everyone's listening.
So I'm going to come to those questions now, and we have enough questions, right? So basically, let me turn to the panelists and start with Sherry at the other end, and then we'll work our way down.
Where to begin? Since I'm first, I get to pick the easy ones. There was a question about BRI diplomacy, and I spent 3 years as a diplomat in Beijing after a stint being an investment banker. You work that out. So I was not a great diplomat, let's put it that way. Always trying to cut through to trying to figure out where the money was and where sort of the business was being driven. And if you do think of it that way, if you think of the Belt and Road that way, actually it partners very well with another of China's really important strategies, which is Made in China 2025. And so when you talk about sort of thinking about economic diplomacy, I mean, it's not very different from many other countries around the globe today and in the past, thinking about how to drive higher value economy inside and being able to drive an export-led economy. So this fundamental thinking about transportation, infrastructure, power sustainability, building up prosperity in the countries, particularly around China and extending out. You know, when you partner it with that China, Made in China 2025 strategy, actually that makes a lot of sense. Your point about there being a void in the world in terms of globalization, in terms of a champion of trade, I think that's right as well. I'm not entirely sure that it was a complete design to fill a void. I think this has been in the planning and in the thinking for many decades. We all know about the 5-year plans. That's how China starts setting some of these objectives. The Belt and Road Initiative, was launched in 2013. A very different time from now in terms of geopolitics. So I think that China thinks in decades, Asia thinks in decades. And actually this one is pushing forward multiple strands of both multilateral as well as China-driven planning. On a similar front, if we start thinking about the definition of infrastructure, infrastructure does mean different things to different people, absolutely rightly put. And I think that where this becomes a challenge and it may be an intellectual opportunity for the world is thinking about it from a financial services perspective and funding it, which obviously City of London is very interested and keen to be part of that debate. And ultimately, where we should be really aiming globally is creating infrastructure as an asset class. Infrastructure that you're able to have good primary markets in order to fund it and secondary markets in order to trade it. And that's where that question becomes really difficult. Because how is it that you're going to trade something that fundamentally is perhaps a transportation infrastructure and compare that to perhaps a digital infrastructure or indeed energy infrastructure? So I think that this is an ongoing hot debate, and perhaps we should take it a step at a time. Perhaps take that old adage from Deng Xiaoping, let's feel this one by crossing the river by feeling the stones. Let's pick that first stone. It's not only which type of infrastructure, but where in the world it is. And if you can start creating a robust market as infrastructure that starts becoming tradable, easily priced, something that the financial markets start getting their head around, pension funds are very keen to get involved in, then it can work from there, from asset class to asset class, infrastructure to infrastructure. That would be the way we would be thinking about it.
Thank you very much. George.
Thank you. The question about blockchain and fintech and so on, I think definitely very important now. In Hong Kong, for example, we now have about 300 fintech companies in Cyberport, which is an ecosystem that includes about 1,300 tech companies and startups. You can see that blockchain is the key. It's the underlying technology. Many people call it the governance technology as well, because it connects people and businesses to make sure that transaction can happen, can be traced. So along the Belt and Road, where a lot of uncertainties and new friendship to be built and so on, blockchain is definitely the way to go. And I'm sure the AIFC extensive links now with the Hong Kong Stock Exchange and Hong Kong as our international financial center as a whole, and Cyberport already show that Kazakhstan is not only doing it, but it's a leapfrog. and we can work together. So I think tremendous opportunity there, and it's a must. Talking about data, the role of data on the digital Silk Road, no question, very important. Kazakhstan again, Astana again, has a lot of potential because this is where everybody is comfortable. Everybody likes Kazakhstan, and we come here, very easily, smoothly, safely. And data is the new oil. Data is a new currency of the digital economy. So, and I can see that in Kazakhstan, the young people, the SMEs, are catching up fast in the digital tech side. So nowadays, digital is a new English. It's a new working language. And AI is a new software. So innovation is a new way to go. So everybody is embracing it now in Kazakhstan. So I see a lot of opportunity here for involving a lot of data business here in Kazakhstan for the Belt and Road. Hong Kong is another ideal place because in Hong Kong we also have very good legal system, the British common law, and we have the best protection for IP and privacy and so on. Kazakhstan is doing the same. I think you need that sort of infrastructure in order for this valuable asset called data to be put, to be managed in. So going forward, the most important assets are really digital assets. They're all data. So I think places like Astana, Hong Kong, I think we should aim for a big piece of the business in the data business going forward. We need to do more in order to achieve that, and that means it's really a lot of PPP. For example, the EU just announced the very stringent rules about data, very serious piece of law, and many countries are doing the same. So it's not so easy for data to be used, to be circulated, to be shared, if not managed well. So we have opportunities, but also a lot of challenges ahead.
Thank you very much, George. Dr. Zhang, please.
Okay, let me respond to probably 2 or 3 questions. First is how to make Astana be a renminbi financial center. I think actually, China has already worked together with Kazakhstan government in some areas very well. For example, we have already signed the currency swap agreement, and also China has made renminbi directly transaction with Kazakhstan's currency, right? It's very good development, I think. For making Astana the international financial center, especially renminbi offshore center, I think probably a couple of things can be done. First is try to provide more preferential policies in order to attract more foreign financial institutions to settle down here, including banks and other non-bank financial institutes and other institutions, and also I think China has built up a very efficient clearing system already. We call it CHIPS. So this is a very important infrastructure for having internationally clearing business. So I'm not quite sure Astana has already been involved in. This is good, and I think as long as more foreign banks, including Chinese bank and other foreign banks, settle down in here, then you can do more RMB business, including settlement and also loans and issuing bond service, other business, I think. So that is my suggestion.
Thank you very much.
So for the second,
Sorry, please go ahead.
go ahead. Okay, second question is about what? About governance of the BRI. I think it's probably difficult to have concrete framework for BRI governance, because BRI is just the initiative so including some principles from some mechanism, agreement. So it covered a lot of different projects actually. Most of them run independently, separately. So it's difficult to have very concrete, very sophisticated governance structure. So it depends on, I think. But the principle, I agree that will be mutual benefit, will be transparent, will be fair. So I think this is the principle for the governance. For the infrastructure issue, I think traditionally we agree that the infrastructure mainly refers to transportation, ports, and energy program. But now probably we should expand to more areas, including those many soft areas like education and research, scientific research, and also the modern communication facility like 5G, AI. So all of these can be infrastructure. So that's my answer.
Thank you very much. We're almost out of time, but I'm going to turn to Ariel to finish us.
I'll be brief. We need to wrap up. I think there is a connection between governance and blockchain. Blockchain provides more security in document flow than anything else that exists. Therefore, you can track and trace transactions, documents, etc. That increases the level of governance and the level of transparency. First. Second, I would be the first one to champion a greater Chinese role in better governance. However, the standards of governance historically were set in Northern Europe and the United States. Everybody had their flows. There were massive delinquencies of governance everywhere, including my country. However, I think countries in the region, I don't want to mention any names, everybody knows the TI, Transparency International Rankings, countries in the region have a long way to go. And that brings me to the third and final point. I think for now, the English law is the preferred tool of governance. Both contract law, administrative law, tort law, etc., and security laws. If we stick to the English law, apply it in a transparent fashion, that will do a lot of good in development of BRI and its projects. Finally, last point, human resources. We did not talk much about human resources. From my conversations with colleagues here, I think there is a deficit of people who can apply and develop technologies like blockchain, technologies like AI, and there's a long list. So to play the catch-up, the Chinese colleague just mentioned education, absolutely important to play catch-up in development these human resources for the 21st century to make Belt and Road projects and Belt and Road as a whole a reality. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Ariel. So all that remains for me now is to thank the panelists and thank you all for being here and ask you to join me in giving a hand to the panelists for this discussion.
We're going to continue our discussion on Belt and Road in 25 minutes, 11:30, and please enjoy the coffee break now.
Самұрық қазына қорының трансформациясы жалғасуда. Қазатом өнеркәсіп, уран өндіру нарығындағы көшбасшы. Біз дүниежүзі бойынша атом электростанцияларының 20%-ын шикізатпен қамтамасыз станция. Біздің өндіру тәсілімізді атом энергиясы жөніндегі халықаралық агенттік ең таза және қауіпсіз деп мойындаған. Трансформацияның арқасында компания өндіріс тиімділігін 2 есе арттырады. Жабдықтарды жаңарту, энергияны үнемдеу, технологиялық жетілдіру есебінен автоматтандыру бізге бірнеше миллиард теңге үнемдеуге мүмкіндік береді. Мақсатымыз шикізат көзінен отын өндірушіге айналу. Трансформация жалғасуда, және бұл игі істің бастамасы ғана.
Sberbank has been successfully operating in Kazakhstan for 11 years and ranks 4th in terms of assets among second-tier banks. Sberbank is the largest foreign institutional investor in the economy of Kazakhstan. Sberbank is the leader of the state entrepreneurship support programs of DAMI Fund. We actively support the development of the real sector of Kazakhstan's economy. Today, over 40,000 Kazakhstani and foreign companies have trust in Sberbank. 1.5 million retail clients. Sberbank. Says of Sberbank.
Еуразиялық топ Қазақстан Республикасы тау-кен металлургиялық кешенінің 3/4 құрайды. Елдің 4 тарабындағы 12 кәсіпорында 61 мың тарабындағы қызметкер еңбек етеді. Еуразиялық топ кәсіпорындары кен игеру, өңдеу, энергетика,